Well, this year, the 10th Australian Mental Health Prize has just been launched. Let's speak to the winner of last year, particularly in the area of lived experience, and speak to Dr. Louise Byrne. Louise, lovely to meet you. Thank you for your time, and a little late, but congratulations on your win last year.
Thanks, Peter. Lovely to be here.
What's it like winning an award like this? You've done so much work. I've read up a little bit about you. You've kind of been grinding away at this for quite some time.
I have. It was a really funny experience, actually. It was a funny mix of feeling incredibly honoured and validated, but also really took me back to particularly my teenage years, where a lot of my kind of adversity challenges started, and the prognosis I was given was that I shouldn't expect to have a normal life or normal milestones, have a partner, be able to live independently and all that sort of thing. And so it was very emotional, because it was like, gosh, how far removed is this from what I was told to expect, for my life. And it was sad and happy at the same time.
Yeah, no, I can totally understand that. And geez, I mean, what a thing to be told at that time. You're probably thinking, I've got the rest of my life ahead of me. What am I supposed to look forward to?
Exactly. It was one of the stupidest things anyone ever said to me. And it was one of the things that's fired me up many times over the years to keep fighting for systems that are not damaging to people.
I guess that planted the seed, but then you've kind of got to water it and keep it growing.
You do. And I guess I feel like I was lucky in a way that I had so many crappy experiences that I've got plenty to draw from. And every time, my fires start to dim a little bit, it's like, oh, do you remember that? Or I have a new experience, because, my challenge is certainly ongoing, and in many different ways, with both disability as well as, mental health challenges and all manner of things. So, I still have adverse experiences in the system and with services, and it just continues to fire me up.
Are we kind of getting better at it? Your kind of focus, if you like, your category was for lived experience, and heavens above, we can't put enough emphasis on people's lived experience. But are we kind of getting better in A, understanding it, and B, doing something about it?
I'm not sure. I'd love to be more positive, but I think overall not really that much. I think, unfortunately, there's been a huge acknowledgement of how poorly the system and services typically are meeting. And that's not to say that there aren't exceptions. There are some exceptional services. And I think particularly where there's a great emphasis on the person, at the autonomy of the person, respecting the expertise each individual holds in their own health journey. In those places, certainly there are good outcomes. But overall, the national reporting and the state reporting is not indicating that things are really changing. And I think a big reason for that is that systems are what they are, and they're very slow and reluctant to change. And so even when they're told that things are not working, the types of brains that are employed to design the processes that have to happen, and who are in control of designing funding guidelines and things like that, are still the same people that have been helping the system to underperform for all these decades. And so until we have a significant shift in the types of thinking that are applied at that level of development, then we're not going to have really notable changes.
Some of the words that you use, because I think words are really, really important. Some of the words that you use and things I've read about you are things like, this sort of thing needs to be embedded into the system. Things like authenticity, things like evidence-based. I mean, these are all kind of things that you'd say, well, of course, but, it isn't, of course.
It's not an of course, unfortunately. Even just the fact of lived experience adding value. I literally was in a meeting 2 days ago, Peter, with people in all the major professions, as in health professions, and it was supposed to be about a pretty major funding initiative in a multidisciplinary environment. And the kinds of comments that they were making about lived experience were as derisive as the sorts of things I was hearing 20 years ago.
Wow.
And it didn't surprise me, because whilst the average person on the street, and, I don't know how many times over the last 21 years, people have said, oh, what do you do for a living? And I explain, and they go, oh, that's amazing. I want to see a peer worker, it just makes so much sense. Of course, these are people who've walked that journey, who can speak to that. But our professions, our health professions, whilst there are allies, and those people are just gold and we value them so much, the vast majority of people are still being trained in a way like that. There's no mention made of the lived experience contribution, lived expertise, lived experience leadership, or any nobody even knows about it until they actually exit and come into industry. And by that time, they've been trained in the expert patient model, in effectively taking power from people, in telling people what to do instead of partnering with them, and certainly not in listening to somebody's wisdom about their own experience. So I think fundamentally there are things that are not being addressed in terms of attitudes and willingness, that it's going to take a profound shift. And it's going to need to start with our higher education as well as people who are already employed in the industry.
So in a sense, you talked about, funding models and programs, et cetera. So a lot of that money is being wasted then, because it's sort of being used in the wrong area or going to the wrong area.
In my opinion, yeah.
Yeah.
Very firmly. I think when we've got the Productivity Commission report, on mental health, we've got the Royal Commission into mental health services in Victoria, and they mimic the findings of the Burdekin report, of the Richmond report. How many times do we have to say, no, the system's failing before we actually change the system? Because that's what's not happening. People are not being trained in fundamentally different ways. The workforce is not being configured in different ways. The big missing link, surely any person with the slightest scrap of common sense can see that when you're talking about a journey that takes you through distress and pain and crisis and all of these deeply emotional things, and it is the social and emotional stuff that requires some sort of shift for things to get better for someone. People who understand what that feels like are a very logical and needed component of helping to inform the way that the system, looks, and also being part of, support services. But when the vast majority of people employed in positions of power and in other professions are still not embracing and willing to embed the authentic perspectives of lived experience, as you mentioned, then we can't get traction because we're too new, we don't have the clout, we don't have the power, we don't have the money. So we can be there, but we're still being held at an arm's distance most of the time, and the real decision-making and the real power is still sitting where it always has.
Now, you talked about training. You've done a bit of work in that area, as in training people to kind of understand this sort of stuff.
Yeah, it's been a funny journey for me, actually, Peter, because I was in actual face-to-face support roles for a while, and then I did all sorts of lived and living experience designated positions, and then I was in research for 16 years. And one of the biggest findings of the research was that until and unless we have good understanding, and valuing and respect for our workforce, then everything else we do is going to be compromised, because we are a relatively emerging workforce. And so the whole rest of the system needs to embrace us effectively. And the way that happens, we found, is through exposure and understanding. And then I started doing quite a bit of consulting with state governments and with organisations. And I kept saying, look, the big thing you need, the big missing link, like you can make all these plans and you can employ people, but if people around them don't understand their value and the uniqueness of the work, why it's there and what it can add, then you're going to continue to have the same problems. And in a nutshell, nobody was providing wide-scale education to do that education, that understanding piece. And I just so got to the point where I was like, well, our team should do that because we know about it. We've spent a really significant amount of time looking at this. We know exactly the strategies are that help. We know what the messages are. So, yeah, it just kind of developed organically, I suppose.
That's incredible, and congratulations and more power to your elbow. I would like to say now we're out of time for this interview. We could chat for hours, and I will put the link to your website up on our show notes, and also the Australian Mental Health Prize if people would like to nominate. So I guess given the fact that you've been recognised, there's lots of other people, maybe not quite as good as you, Louise, but I'm sure there's lots of people out there that deserve this recognition, at least to be nominated, and who knows, maybe go before the committee to be voted as this year's winner. So we'd put those details up as well. And as I say, you probably would encourage people to, if there's someone out there that is making a difference and there's different categories, you would be very encouraging of those people to be nominated.
Oh, absolutely. And especially folks who are representing lived experience.
Yeah.
Let's promote that. Let's get that, raise that voice.
Louise, you've done that so well. As I said, we could chat for hours. So I'm glad we've made contact. We might have to see if we can get you back. There's so many other issues we could have explored there. It's been very thought-provoking, very thoughtful, and more importantly, very much appreciated.
Thanks, Peter. I'd love to.
That's Dr. Louise Byrne. How impressive was that? Dr. Louise Byrne was last year's winner of the Australian Mental Health Prize for lived experience.